Welcome to Think Piece number 7 from Benjamin Wall. It shows how the 5 dimensions of value have been built up in the West over the past 700 years, which is a kind of history of the development of capitalism. The method is to interpret the principal historical facts in terms of the dimensions of value, generating insights in both directions. We understand more about the driving forces in the history of Western business and learn more about the success factors in each dimension of value. The video begins with an introduction to the dimensions of value in their historical context, to then examine the historical nature of each dimension with an overview at the end. The dimensions originated as follows in the West. Degree value to raise status, illustrated today by the Louis Vuitton handbag, originated in the northern Italian city-states during the Renaissance. For example, luxury silks in Genoa during the 14th century. Delight value to realize lifestyle visions, today found in Nike sportswear, began in Holland in the Enlightenment. For example, lace clothes in the 17th century showing the new refined lifestyle of the middle class. Deed value to empower daily activities, seen today in the versatility of the Burberry trench coat, originated in the first industrial revolution in England, when in the 19th century the world's masses had a second or third set of cotton clothes for different activities, for example, work, leisure, and church. Dexterity value to generate all-around benefits, illustrated today by the North Face backpack suitable for work and play, began in the second industrial revolution and is exemplified by nylon stockings in the USA, which could be worn all the time. Finally, the deep connect dimension to generate meaning in multiple contexts, seen today in Patagonia outdoor wear celebrating innovation, sport, and nature, is a new business paradigm beginning in 2010 and is exemplified by a number of new fashion brands using sustainable production methods and materials. The video will now show how each dimension drove economic development in its epoch to generate value in a specific manner, where the following rough framework will be applied. Value transactions in buying and selling arise out of a business model which is based on an underlying entrepreneurial approach. Regarding revenues from consumers, companies made B2C value offers in a manner to raise turnover based on how they worked the market. Regarding operations, companies made B2B value offers, which were part of lowering companies' costs within the organizational structures. Regarding the surplus of revenue over costs, companies designed their value offers in a specific manner from which they could channel their growth and ultimately drive their profit. We begin with degree value, which was the innovation in business practice during driving the North Italian economy between the end of the 13th and the beginning of the 16th centuries, most prominently in Venice, Florence, Milan, and Genoa. In B2C, luxury goods from trade routes with the Near East and Central Asia gave elite status to both merchants in the cities and aristocrats in the countryside. The precondition for people to move from the land and gain the status as city dwellers, free from aristocrats, was the availability of food and other daily goods which they could buy and consume. Specific trade routes for specific luxury goods were under the control of the merchants of a given city. The merchants boosted their turnover by raising their market share in trade routes, luxury goods, and finance. Aristocrats boosted their turnover by raising their market share in land and agricultural products. In working the market, the product features as luxury goods or daily consumables were enough to sell the items to the intended customer groups. In B2B, resources such as ships, sailors, finance, and goods to be traded enjoyed a standing on the market to be regarded as suitable for the trade voyages. In the surrounding countryside, feudalism had never taken hold and there was rather sharecropping agreements. The aristocrat as landlord and the farmer as sharecropper each enjoyed a standing as economic actors to share in the harvest and the improvements to the farms. The ownership, as it were, of the trade routes, ships, and lands involved the cost of protecting them against enemies. These costs were covered jointly by the cities to the benefit of their merchants and by groupings of aristocrats in the countryside. The merchant companies consisted of assets and ships, recognized assets to trade as routes, and finance, while aristocrats had their lands and the tenant farmers. These resources were simply assembled and set to work together like building blocks. Products and resources were designed to be premium, that is, arising from the best of class in trade routes, ships, luxury goods, and land holdings. Best of class also included innovations in finance and accounting. For example, bills of exchange, calculations of value in different currencies, and double-entry bookkeeping. The growth of a business, city, or aristocrat was accomplished by extending the domain of trade routes or land owned, whereby only trade routes or land with an established standing were regarded as valuable. Given that there was a finite amount of such trade routes and land, there was fierce rivalry between merchants, cities, and aristocrats for these limited assets, often leading to war. Profitability came out of the income stream generated from the fixed assets of land, trade routes, and finance. We move on to delight value, invented in Holland and the driving economics force from the end of the 16th to the beginning of the 18th centuries. The B2C value offered was the vision of an urban lifestyle as consumer with two new aspects. First, a stable supply of goods for sustained well-being, particularly food, and second, a choice of goods from around the world. European city residents for the first time could feel secure in enjoying a selection of what the world had to offer. The Dutch companies raised turnover during this period by serving more and more segments located in the Netherlands, and increasingly in other European countries, plus long-distance trade to Asia and the Americas. New in business was to systematically serve two fundamental segments with different lifestyles. First, the elite spread throughout the world, and second, the middle class in European cities. In operations, a new vision for B2B companies emerged of being specialist producers in the globalized supply chain of a particular industry under stable conditions of demand and supply. This gave a sustained business perspective to suppliers, who could be sailmakers for ships in Amsterdam or territories in Asia forced to produce spices for long-distance trade. That is, clusters were formed which lowered the costs. Businesses enjoyed economies of scope across their product portfolio, that is, the market information each business gathered and the market profile each business built up could be used to advantage across the entire product portfolio. Also, there were so-called external economies of scale within each industry, most importantly, a pool of specialized workers, suppliers, and knowledge. Within these clusters, coalitions of traders, producers, and financiers were formed with shared interests in maintaining stable working relationships. The Dutch East India Company can be seen as a grand coalition in operational terms of 7 different trading companies which had been joined together as orchestrated by the Dutch government. The Dutch East India Company was also a coalition of shareholders who agreed to bundle together their capital under the terms of the major financial innovation of the era, the joint stock company. This financial innovation regulated mutual interests and obligations in the legal entity. Another financial innovation was mutual funds, again a kind of coalition amongst funds holders. The value offers were designed as holistic solutions uniting opposites, the best example of which is the role of Amsterdam as an entrepot. The goods of the whole world were united in coming to the single location Amsterdam, and the single location Amsterdam was the source of the world's goods. Growth was intensive, that is, covering ever more demands of the served segments by selling to them an ever wider range of the world's goods. The merchants at the heart of the Amsterdam entrepot had the choice of which goods to buy from wherever, which were their variable costs, and again the choice for what to sell to whom and when, which were their revenues. Profit came from choosing where and when to buy and sell to gain the best short-term margin. Deed value was the innovative driver in the English economy between the late 18th and the early 20th centuries. B2C value was offered to the world's masses in the variability of, say, 3 sets of clothes for different activities, and in the ease and convenience of household utensils. English companies were first movers in opening the global masses to the variety in manufactures, e.g. textiles and metal goods, as well as in agricultural goods, e.g. sugar and tobacco. As first mover, new markets were developed nationally and internationally. Nationally, new transport methods such as canals and later railroads made available greater volumes in a greater variety of clothing, household goods, and food. For example, different kinds of food for different meals during the day and for different days of the week were available to the English masses for the first time. Globally, new markets were developed first by point-to-point trade, from one source of supply in the world to one source of demand in the world. For example, slaves from Africa and spices from Asia went to the plantation owners in the Americas. England then went on to promote free trade throughout the world, that is, its ships were entitled to trade everywhere without barriers. In B2B, mechanical machines and other production facilities were offered as resources to empower the production operations of three kinds of businesses: factories and farms in England and plantations overseas. Operations were also empowered by developments in finance to improve the handling of liquidity and working capital to keep production running smoothly. Thousands of innovations in the mechanization of production and transport improved resource utilization in the individual operations. For example, even plantations had a kind of manufacturing operation to process the crop into a product, e.g., sugarcane into raw sugar, which raised productivity. And steamships raised the productivity of shipping compared to sailing ships. Each individual operation was a platform which could adjust the quantity and quality of its output to changing demand. There were linkages between the different industries where the individual operational platforms of the companies readily linked up. For example, the steam engine stimulated more metallic goods to improve transport, which stimulated more productive farms in selling their products to a larger market, which supported the movement of people to cities, where they were the workforce for cotton mills. Goods were designed from innovations in mechanization to empower what humans were doing in the broadest sense. In B2C, mechanization in manufacturing and agriculture produced goods which enabled the daily activities of dressing, doing housework, eating, and so on to be conducted with greater ease and variety. In B2B, the manual work of humans was replaced by machines, which were more powerful, faster, and more accurate. Growth took place via opportunities in specific locations around the world, where market openings were sometimes forced with the help of the Royal Navy. Opportunities also arose nationally in the markets for specific industries due to innovations or linkages with other industries. Profitability was in the form of the long-term margin. The operations required relatively high setup costs, and then profit was generated over decades due to the relatively low operating costs of wage or slave labor. Dexterity value was an innovation in business practice in the USA, dominating the economy from the late 19th to the early 21st centuries, that is, still ongoing. B2C value was offered in uniform goods such as processed food and uniform services such as banking accounts and electricity, which raised the living standards of the American masses. Companies raised turnover by producing standardized mass products to replace the existing explicit demand for local offers. For example, centralized food and energy companies scaled up their production to replace local small butchers, bakers, and coal merchants. Marketing was key to this scaling up, with product features targeted to the demands of specific segments, giving birth to product management and advertising in business. B2B value was also standardized. Uniform goods such as interchangeable machine parts and mass assembly lines, as well as uniform services in transport, such as railroads, and uniform services in finance, such as trust companies and holding companies, all supported the industrialization and mass distribution of the large, scaled-up companies. When companies scaled up, it was most efficient to scale up as far as possible, that is, to cover the entire market and become a monopoly. There was a symbiosis between the single businesses of companies and the entire enterprise, Each single business made a specific contribution to strengthen the whole company, and in turn, the single business was strengthened by being able to draw on a larger operation. This symbiosis within enterprises was made possible by the professionalization within managerial hierarchies seen in specialized functions, information sharing, and coordination. The design of value offers were continuously improved in terms of their quality, durability, reliability, and the reduction in effort to consume or produce. Companies grew first in a step-by-step evolution in their scaling up, to then mutate to a monopoly, for example in steel, oil, railroads, and meat processing, or to mutate to a new business model, for example the Sears catalog growing to cover every product category, or A&P introducing the new economy stores around World War I. Profitability was calculated based on discounted cash flow. Each single business within a company had its own profile of cash in and cash out over time as it grew, stabilized, and declined. The company's entire profitability was the aggregation of these individual discounted cash flows. Deep Connect value is just emerging in the past decade, and elements are found in selected companies around the world. For example, Toyota, Hyundai, and Samsung in Asia, BMW, IKEA, Unilever, and Danone in Europe, and Patagonia, Tesla, Walmart, and Procter & Gamble in North America. In B2C, Deep Connect value gives meaning to the lives of consumers by connecting the essence of multiple contexts with benefits for themselves, nature, and communities. For example, buying the outdoor wear of Patagonia intensifies the experience of the outdoor activity for the consumer, minimizes the harm to the environment, and supports innovation in American manufacturing. Turnover is raised by selling products which are convincing due to their extended life cycle. For example, the software updates to Tesla cars which raise their value over time. The market is worked by offering forward-looking benefits to forward-looking segments only. For example, the anti-racist advertising from Procter & Gamble exclusively addresses progressive consumers. In B2B, the network of suppliers to a business co-develop cutting-edge applications of technologies. For example, Patagonia works together with supplier mills on the new materials, and Tesla works with the supplier Panasonic on battery technology. Each new application is then connected in its essence to the essence of other applications to develop truly innovative products. Costs are lowered when an internal code of behavior is simply transported to the outside world. For example, Patagonia sees no value in fashion trends, and its customers have to accept that clothes are not remodeled in line with fashion. Costs are also lowered when an external code is transported to internal operations. For example, these companies as a rule avoid costs in basic research by making use of existing technologies and focusing their innovation simply on the applications. Operations are thus organized as internal and external networks experimenting in the applications of technologies to create products for a pure world that is only forward-looking. Products are designed to transform to a new paradigm of essential connections, where the connections are made both in the technological applications making up the product and in the multiple contexts in which value is generated. The essential connections benefit nature and communities. Growth is attained by the convergence in combining technologies to fill an empty space between industries. For example, Tesla fills the empty space between automobiles, software, and electrical energy. Profitability comes from the cash flow generated by successful market launches. In Deep Connect, there are many market launches as experiments which do not succeed, generating negative cash flow. Thus, time to market is not relevant, but rather the time to positive cash flow from a successful launch. An overview sums up the development of value dimensions in the history of Western business. Degree value and status arose from trade in luxury goods in northern Italy and the Renaissance, based on the ownership of trade routes, land, and wealth, where these fixed assets generated an income stream. The light value in a lifestyle vision of choices for a European middle class was developed in the Dutch Enlightenment based on coalitions of economic actors who profited from choices in maximizing the short-term margin of price and variable costs. Deed value in empowered daily activities for the world's masses was developed in England during the First Industrial Revolution, where businesses were operational platforms generating a long-term margin from their low labor costs. Dexterity value of all-around benefits for American households was developed during the Second Industrial Revolution, offered by enterprises of multiple businesses, each with their own profile of cash flow over time to be discounted. Finally, meaning and deep connect value for communities is just emerging in selected companies around the world, generated by internal and external networks, generating positive cash flow from successful market experiments to fill empty spaces. For more information, see videos on this channel and visit my website.